Hello, welcome to the Floating Memory Podcast. We're your hosts, Kinship,
And BlankGinger.
and we're here today to talk to you about some cards that are not so good in the current meta, but maybe with just a little bit of help, they could be some real players in the future. So currently we have 12 cards, 3 from each of the base elements, and we're going to go through all those. So what do we have up first?
Well, first we're going to go over norm elements, and our first card that we're going to be reviewing is Fervent Beastmaster. It is a 5 cost ally tamer human. It has 3 attack and 3 health, class bonus vigor, and also as long as you control a beast ally, Fervent Beastmaster gets +1 attack and +1 health.
That doesn't sound like too bad of a stat line. Why is this card not seeing any play?
Well, I would say because 5 cost is very, very high for something that you want to be attacking with every turn if you possibly can. If you can get the extra beast ally, it's a 4/4 for 5, and that's a little bit better. But what do you think would make this card even better and more playable in the future?
So the reason we picked this card was it actually has vigor and that passive that was mentioned. So in theory, if a beast could come out, that could be a 4/4 with vigor, meaning that you could attack on your turn with it and then also have it up on your opponent's steps. So in my eyes, a cool thing to have would be one, a way to get intercept on it, which if we look at who would be playing this, it's Tamer, so most likely this would be going in Sylvie decks. One of the Sylvies already gives intercept, but she only gives it to Beast. So the 2-for-1 combo here, the best case scenario would be at some point in the future, we end up with a Fantasia that can alter Fervent Beastmaster and make it into a Beast, because then you could potentially have both.
Right. And another thing to that point is if we just had a Fantasia that gave intercept, that would also be a little bit
Yeah.
stronger on anything that has vigor, uh, the Hawk or maybe Vanguard, something
Yeah.
like that.
And that's maybe a bit more realistic because so far at the time of recording, the one Fantasia we've had the pleasure of seeing gave vigor, which obviously does not help this card, but if there were an intercept, that would be fantastic.
All right, what's our next card that we're going to be looking at today?
So up next we have Port Smuggler. This is a card that I have literally never seen played yet. It is 2 cost, Assassin Human with a class bonus of Port Smuggler's attacks can't be intercepted, and it is a 1/2.
All right, so why is this card not seeing play right now?
So aside from the not so great stat line, there's currently not really any good ways to buff Port Smuggler. Obviously, with the intercept, you want to be getting through to your opponent, but that doesn't really matter if you're doing just 1 damage at a time. So
Right.
how do we fix that?
Well, one way is what we just talked about, Fantasias. Fantasias can offer some attack buffs and some defense buffs. So maybe if you stack multiple Fantasias onto Port Smuggler and you're an assassin, you get that class bonus to where it can't be intercepted, and then you have somebody that's stacked up with a bunch of extra attack and power to hit directly into the champion's face without any intercepting. And I would say one thing right now, we're not seeing too many interceptors in the meta, but
Yep.
we will, I think, start seeing a lot more interceptors coming in the next few weeks, and definitely in Fractured Crown, with Sylvie becoming more relevant, and maybe Esteem Knight seeing some more play again or something like that.
Yeah, Fractured Crown, I think, really is going to afford us the opportunity to play a little bit slower. They've said that they're not as keen on just rushing to 3 and winning, not really how they envision the game. So things that can deal more consistent damage and stay out and kind of be tricky, they're going to be more marketable.
Right. All right. So our next card that we're going to be going over is Smoke
Smoke
Bombs.
bombs.
It's a regalia, and it is 1 cost Assassin Bauble. Banish Smoke Bombs. Target ally gains stealth until end of turn. Draw a card.
So all that sounds really good. Why is this not seeing play?
Well, I would say this is not seeing play for one major reason, and that's because no one really cares about keeping their allies alive for a turn. They're more focused on keeping their champion alive and not attacked. That's why you see cards like Shroud and Mist being played right now, because it stops from you attacking our champion. However, whenever allies become a little bit bigger, maybe some interceptors come into play, and you need to start protecting those allies a lot more. Smoke bombs can definitely see a home in a lot of those decks. Maybe those decks that are playing the new Crawl, the giant dragon. This could be an extra way to give him the edge of now you have Spell Shroud and Stealth,
Yeah.
or maybe some other creatures that are just bigger, like Fervent Beastmaster or your Galahad or your Arthur, something that you definitely don't want to be hit, can now be protected with stealth for the turn.
Yeah, another thing to think about is currently this has one reserve cost, and in the meta we're in right now, just even the one cost or waiting one extra turn is pretty detrimental because
Right.
of how fast the game is. So I think whenever we get the fractals and they can help pay for costs on things, you're not
Right.
going to be as limited. And then this will be great because it does draw a card when you get it out. So if you can have that come across basically for free and then draw a card, you're just going positive and you get to protect something.
And the biggest part of this is no class bonus. So this could go into any deck, really. Any deck that wants to protect one big ally, I would
Yep,
say.
that's another benefit. See, up next, we're going to be moving on to the fire. And so we're going to look at our first fire card, which is Immolation Trap. So Immolation Trap is interesting because it has a 2 cost. However, it is an assassin card with class bonus of this card costs 2 less to activate. So it is effectively free as long as you are in Fire Assassin. So its text is destroy target damaged ally, and then it's also at fast speed.
So why do you think this card's not seeing as much play right now?
So currently, it is kind of hard to justify playing this card out, even if it is free, because there are no good ways to damage an ally on an opponent's turn outside of combat, which is not super reliable. Because, as we said earlier, there's not a lot of allies just even seeing play in the meta. So, if that's the case, and this thing, even at free, isn't being played, how are we going to fix that?
Well, the biggest thing would be maybe a recurable effect that can damage allies to where
Mhm.
you don't have to spend a card to do it. Because the biggest drawback to this card is you have to have spent another card in some way. So it feels really bad to 2-for-1 yourself. Either you lost an ally in combat or you used uh, um, Spark a Light or
Yeah.
something like that to do a little bit of damage and then finish it off. But if we could see some type of domain or some type of fractal or
Mhm.
something like that, or even an effect like Spark Fairy, but only for allies, then we could see recurable damage onto allies, maybe ping for one, and then play an Immolation Trap for free. And then now you've just a 1-for-1, and
Yeah.
that's a lot better.
I think in addition to that, there's kind of almost not a target for this yet, because a lot of the
Right.
allies that we have in the game, they're not very hard to remove. There are plenty of good options. The one thing that is coming up that will be important is crawl,
Exactly. Crawl, we're going to talk a lot about in this podcast.
just a little
Um,
bit.
Considering that it's going to be the big bad, is what we're seeing it as of Fractured Crown. It's got
Yeah,
Spell Shroud,
spell shroud,
it's got Vigor
vigor.
and True Sight. It's
It's a
gonna
6/8, just
it's
huge
a
creature.
very big creature. So this is one way that you could take it out because this is a skill rather than a spell, which means that it gets around Spell Shroud. You are able to choose the allies or target the allies with this skill.
Yep, and that might be a little bit of a theme coming up.
Right?
Is useful
Exactly.
skills.
So our next card is
Also happens to be a skill.
it is a skill. It is Blazing Throw. It is one cost slow, and it is an action warrior skill. As an additional cost to activate this card, sacrifice a weapon you control and deal 4 damage to target unit. So, what is bad about this card, and why is it not seeing play right now?
So Blazing Throw is a lot of damage at a very low cost, which is great. But its activation cost right now is a little too slow. There is not a solid use case in my mind where you want to just throw away a sword. I know Lorraine can get a sword back on Spirit Ruler, which is
Right.
cool. So you could potentially get counters, but that alone to me is not enough to justify it. I would need to see a weapon that you could get out for free that you could sack to make any use of this.
Right. Some type of
Some,
on death effect for the weapon whenever it was destroyed,
yeah.
then you could get some type of effect. It's considered like a drawn blade that when it were to die or
Mhm.
be destroyed, then you would get a draw effect or something similar. So then you could play this
Yep.
blazing throw, get rid of that, get that effect, and then be able to do 4 damage on top of just a normal like 1 damage like you can with the drawn blade.
Yep.
But there is one thing that was spoiled.
It's the Verkian Soul Knife, I believe.
Yes, with that soul knife, you can get around the materialization phase for
Yep.
that. You can just banish 3 fire cards from your graveyard, and you can get that out during your normal main phase. And instead of having to attack with it, you could just use Blazing Throw, to immediately throw it in their face for 4 damage and only 1 cost.
Yep. So with the soul knife in the material board, what you're saying is this goes from I need potentially a turn and then this card or a multi-card combo to just I have this in the sideboard at some point during the game. You throw maybe just even one of these in the deck. You're just
Right.
very happy when you find it, and that's 4 damage to someone's face for one.
Right.
You
Or
can't be mad about that.
a big unit or whatever, because that's,
Yep.
universal 4 damage. What's
And
our
it's a skill, so it'll hit things with Spell Shroud.
exactly? So what's our next card?
So up next we have Spark Fairy, which we actually mentioned a second ago. That is a 3 cost Mage Fairy ally with Stealth and an enter effect of target non-champion object gains at the beginning of your recollection phase. Deal 1 unpreventable damage to your champion for as long as you control Spark Fairy. And then additionally, it is a 1/2.
All right. So this is one of the newer altar cards, which just officially released this past weekend. What is going on with this card? We have a stealth unit similar to the other
This is
fairies,
great.
which is pretty strong. And sometimes those other fairies see play in their respective elements,
Yeah,
but
both of the other fairies I'm seeing quite a bit of, but I haven't seen much of Spark Fairy.
yeah, I think
So
Spark
why is
Fairy's
that?
a little bit weird, because in fire you're trying to be as fast as possible. You're
Mhm.
trying to draw and discard. You're trying to do as much damage as you can up front, or maybe combo off for one big turn. And Spark Fairy is a little bit slower. It's a
Yeah.
1 damage per turn, which, with the game slowing down in Fractured Crown, I think this card's going to be a lot bigger, especially with fractals when they come into play, because you can assign Spark Fairy's effect to a fractal, and then you're just taking damage every turn because you have this mana rock in play that you can't get rid of.
Yep, I think that is the biggest thing for me is that now that we have the fractals and then potentially down the line even other forms of Phantasias, we're seeing these objects that come in that are not allies. Currently, they're very hard to remove. Only Excalibur comes in, but hopefully more things in the future.
Right.
I know maybe in Wind, I think that was talked about. But Spark Fairy before just did not have a good target. Nothing was going to stay permanent. Lorraine's going to break all of her swords. You can't really throw it on a champ. So now you might have mana rocks that sit out the whole game.
Right.
And
Or even some more domains that may come out that
yeah,
stay out a little bit longer, other than just the
yeah, it would be cool to see
yeah.
some more domains, right?
Right. Exactly. All right. So moving on to water, our next card we're going to talk about is Frozen Nova. This is an 8 cost action mage spell at slow speed, has class bonus efficiency, and then it says deal 1 damage to all allies and rest them. Those allies don't wake up during their controller's next wake up phase.
Wow, that sounds not very good for a fast card. Oh
Oh,
wait,
it's slow.
it's slow.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing anything good about this card. Why did we pick that today?
Well, we picked it because with the game slowing down, especially with the new Merlin that has been teased, we see this card actually coming into play a little bit more. The biggest problem with the card currently is it is relegated to only mage with the efficiency, because it is way too high cost to play it anywhere else. And that type of effect of deal 1 damage to all allies, that hurts you really, really bad if you are a onboard player, because your allies are going to be tapped down for an entire turn cycle,
Yeah,
including your next turn, and you're only tapping down uh, the opponent's allies for the next turn, and those are the only ones that they have out at the time. Say they play another one on their turn, that's going to come in. So, two ways to make this better is one, obviously, if we had some way to make it fast, if there was some type of ally that could make mage spells fast, would be very, very good. Or some type of fractal, or,
Riot players would be very
domain.
excited.
Exactly. And then all of your spells are fast, and that would just be very crazy. But if maybe
Yeah.
if we relegate it to just water, it's not as crazy.
Yeah.
Or with the new Merlin Kingslayer, you're going to be slowing down the game a lot, and you're not going to be as ally focused,
Mhm.
and you're going to be more only on Merlin champion focused, and you can have a control strategy moving into the late game. And sometimes you'll need that extra 1 turn for your Merlin to level up again to get an extra draw. And I see Frozen Nova being almost free at that point, because you already have like 6 levels total,
Yep.
8 levels total, and you can just hurt their entire team for an extra turn, which would be
Yeah.
really, really strong.
So as a refresher, the new Merlin has an ability that procs effectively every other turn. to gain some extra damage on attacks and draw a card. So losing a card to extend out even an extra turn is not necessarily bad in this case, because if you can lock your opponents down, here we're going to be resting all the allies. Water already plays cards like Sudden Snow potentially, or Net, that make sure that things come in rested.
Right.
Just delaying that turn could get you the win, and you get to draw a card off of it, so might as well.
And this could be comboed with something like Sudden Snow as well. You play this on your turn, everything's tapped down, and then you go to their turn, you Sudden Snow, and then everything they play for that turn is tapped down.
Yep.
And
One more thing to think about on this card, since we mentioned Phantasias and potentially changing types. The Fantasia, I believe we have now, is that Wind?
yes, it is Wind.
Yeah, that does add Vigor. If there was ever a way to add Vigor to water cards, if
Right.
you were to frozen over your creatures and they had Vigor, well, they would wake up at the end step and your opponents would still be rested. So
Right. That
that's
could
another
be
use.
that could be very strong. What's our next card?
So up next we have Fishing Accident, which has actually seen a little bit of play, but I think it's about to see a lot more play. So Fishing Accident is a one-cost assassin skill with Prepare 2. So if it is not prepared, it will just arrest an ally, which is definitely not bad on its own. But if you do prepare it, instead you will send that ally to the bottom of the owner's deck.
Why do you think that's going to be strong?
So being able to send a creature crawl to the bottom of the deck crawl would be very good in decks that don't
Exactly.
natively search out a lot.
Right. Especially when coming into contact with Crawl, who has
Yeah.
Spell Shroud.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you have a skill that can just immediately deal with it for 1 mana, that's going to be a very, very strong card. So I can definitely see Fishing Accident coming into more light and in some Xander decks or some Tristan decks that are focused on water, being able to deal with a big ally, not just Crawl,
Yep.
but a big ally like that for 1 mana can be very, very detrimental to the opponent's strategy.
Yeah, I think this has the same issue that Immolation Trap did, where you can look at it, you can say, yeah, that's good value, but there's not really a target for this
Right.
card. But there definitely will
Now,
be.
now there's going to be some targets.
So,
All right, so moving on to our next card, we
yeah.
have Mistbound Cutthroat. It is a 4-cost ally assassin Selkie, and it is a 3 attack, 1 health ally, and it has the ability of level 3 plus. Whenever another ally card enters your graveyard from your deck, return Mistbound Cutthroat from your graveyard to the field rested. What do we think about this card currently in the meta?
Currently, I have not seen any of this card, which is a shame because I've heard that it got nerfed 3 times before it released. Must have been real good, but that rested clause on it is just killer. In a
Yeah,
meta that moves this fast, it is just not worth it to bring in a creature that only has one health to be on the field at all. Because if it's not attacking, there's no benefit. And
right,
especially in water, it doesn't have the benefits that fire or wind have, where fire can they can do sacrifices with their creatures for benefit,
right.
and then wind can untap creatures. So water would love that. The problem is water doesn't have it.
Yeah,
So how do
so
we fix this if water doesn't have anything to deal with it?
well, one way is what if we could play multiple elements and not just, Trisket. That's always the contention there.
Mhm.
But if there was another way that we could either add milling to fire or add milling to wind,
Mhm.
taking those cards, putting them into the graveyard, then this doesn't have an elemental clause,
Yep.
which means that if you were to put some type of fire ally into your graveyard, your Mistbound Cutthroat would still trigger as long as you have level 3 plus, and you could get them back. So maybe if we had some combination of wind and fire, or wind or water and fire, or water and wind, we could see this a little bit more played. Or if we just had some more fast powers that milled
Mhm.
in water, then getting Mistbound Cutthroat on the opponent's turn makes it a little bit stronger to
Yeah.
where you can come to your turn, they wake up, and now you can attack with them.
Yep. So something we went over a little fast there that you might not have thought about is Mistbound Cutthroat. When it comes in, that is not an activation.
Right.
And so, per the rules, you cannot activate cards that are a different element than what you play. However, it says that it just comes back to the field rested. That is not an activation. So this could be done outside of its element. So, for instance, if you manage to mill with fire, you could get this water card back.
Exactly. That could be very strong.
And it's definitely something we could see.
All right. So moving on to wind, what do we got?
Well, next we have Arrow Trap, which, wouldn't you believe it, has another skill. So you just know this is going to hate out Crawl. So this one, really interesting. It's fast and it has Prepare 1. So unprepared, it is going to return target attacking ally to its owner's hand, which is already really good. And then secondly, for the class bonus, if it was prepared, you just destroy that ally. So destroy Crawl straight outright.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty good.
So we see this not seeing as much play right now, probably because there's not too many controlling strategies in Wind. I feel like the main strategy for Wind right now is Lorraine,
Yeah.
just trying to power out as fast as possible. But when things start to slow down a little bit more, maybe we can see some controllers controlling Xander decks that allow us to slow the game down with cards like Arrow Trap that are already could see play as
Yep.
of right now. But whenever we're talking about something like Crawl, like a big creature that needs to be dealt with, Arrow Trap can definitely see a lot more play. And I think now we have at least one card in each element that can deal with Crawl. So maybe Crawl's not as scary as we're thinking he's going
Yep.
to be.
And wouldn't you know it, they're all assassins, so
Yeah,
maybe
right.
we're going to see some more Xander coming up.
Exactly. But yeah, I think this card's going to be definitely a lot more played in the next comings.
Yeah, and who's to say that we're not going to get some more big boss monsters spoiled?
True. All right, so our next card that we're going to be going over is Ravaging Tempest. It is an 8 cost mage spell at fast speed. It has efficiency and banish all allies. For each ally banished this way, its controller draws a card.
Ooh, they draw a card?
They draw a
Oh man,
card.
that just seems like a benefit to your opponent if they have creatures, right? Why would you
Yeah.
want to play this card?
Well, one thing with this card is if there's ever a bunch of tokens introduced into the game, maybe you're a Sylvie player, you can banish a lot of your own tokens to draw a bunch of cards and then refuel your hand. That could be very, very good for some Sylvie players who can get those higher pride levels and get those level upgrades to make this cost only like 2,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden you're refilled on your hand. That could be very strong.
Yeah, Sylvie has hand problems, so if there's a way to deal with that,
That would be
you'd
very
be in the
nice.
money.
The other way I could see it is going back to maybe a slowing play Xander.
Mhm.
Um, if you get to towards the end of the game with wind, and you're in the assassin style, this doesn't have class bonus on it, so you can use its efficiency. And on top of that, we have some new cards that were spoiled that deal
Whole
heavily
new mechanic.
with influence, and influence is going to be a big mechanic in Fractured Crown. And what I can see with Ravaging Tempest specifically is you can, at fast speed, force them to draw a bunch of cards and get rid of their board. And now you have this big difference in influence to where you have a lower influence, they have a higher influence.
Mhm.
And you can play that new Luxem card that's also at fast speed
Yep.
that says take damage equal to the difference in influence. So I only have 5, 6 cards, you have 10, 15 cards, and now that 2 cost spell is going to be doing a lot more damage.
Yeah, I can really see this card resulting in some crazy swings versus ally heavy decks.
Right.
Just being able to remove the field on their turn or even on your turn and then swing out.
Exactly. So I think Ravaging Tempest has a spot to where it can actually come into play, especially once influence comes in.
Yep. And it banishes as well, and I do believe it doesn't target, correct?
No, it doesn't target. So
So,
it just is a full board sweep,
yep,
get rid of everything, and it's definitely going to hurt those go wide strategies, even if you're drawing cards to replace those things.
yep.
But guess what? It's another thing to deal with Crawl.
Yeah. Another efficiency card that gets around a big boss monster.
Exactly. All right, we're on to our last card. What are we going to talk about today for our last card?
So this is a real spicy one, a card that I've never seen played in my experience, and that is Camelot Impenetrable. So this is a domain of which I believe there's one in every element, with Dawn of Ashes being introduced for the Norm element in the next set. And so what this does is for 3 cost, on upkeep, whenever you materialize a card, sacrifice Camelot, and then for its ability, whenever you activate a wind element card, you may negate its activation, and if you do, choose an ally and suppress it. So that's a pretty steep cost.
That seems bad. That
That does
seems
seem
really
pretty
bad.
bad.
Why would you want to negate what card you're playing to get effect of just suppressing an ally?
Well, so here's where the fun bit comes in. What ally can we think of that comes in, can't be targeted by spells, so you can't protect it, and might be big and want to hit enemy face?
Well, I guess crawl.
Crawl could be good. So let me put this out. If you have a crawl and you have Camelot out, that's great, and you might be able to suppress a win card to maybe keep him alive for a turn. But then you're stuck without being able to materialize,
Right.
so you're not getting anything out of your deck anymore.
Yeah. So what's great about the whole can't materialize thing with the domains is there's one way to get around that currently in the game, and that is preserve. So if you have some preserve cards, especially in Terra with crawl, then
Right.
you can still get an effect every materialization phase of some kind, getting a card back to your hand mainly, and keep Camelot out because you're not materializing. You are instead taking a preserve card back to your hand. So that's a way to keep Camelot out as long as possible, and then you can play cheap cards and win like favorable wins or maybe even the efficiency cards.
Because those will be going out to your graveyard after, correct?
Exactly.
So you get
So
the floating memory benefit.
if you play favorable wins, you get the floating memory. You can then bounce crawl for the turn so
Yeah,
that he
we
can
love floating memory.
come back. And if you ever do need to materialize with that floating memory, or if there's other effect cards that say banish floating memory from your graveyard to get some type of effect, then that could be very, very strong because now you have a way to protect crawl with your Camelot. You have a way to deal with strong allies that your opponent may have,
Yep,
like
anything with
interceptors.
interceptors.
Exactly. You can get rid of interceptor for a turn so that crawl can attack. And I can see Camelot actually seeing some play a little bit. Maybe not too much, but
Yeah,
it's there. The
having
possibility
that
is there.
strong control piece in an already just very aggressive deck, I think, is pretty unique. And we felt a little bad for hating on Crawl this entire time, so there you go. Card to
Right.
support him.
Exactly. All right. So that's probably going to do it for us today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys could come along to watch our first video. And if you enjoyed it, leave a comment to us. Let us know how you feel about it. Maybe we'll make some more in the future.
And if there's any cards that you think are underplayed right now,
Yeah, definitely leave those in the comments.
thank you.
All right.